Welcome to the Express Boats State of Waterfowl podcast series, presented by Gros Savon Lodge. Join our host, Doug Miller, Executive Operations Manager at Gros Savon Lodge, wildlife biologist and passionate waterfowler, along with co-hosts, world champion duck caller Jim Ronquest and conservationist Kason Shore. State of Waterfowl is designed to provide you, our audience, with data, valuable insight, and information gathered from our guests that will allow us to scientifically determine the state of waterfowl, the health of our resource. We understand that the most valuable asset that we have is our resource, and that is waterfowl. Without them, we do not have a season, commerce, purpose. Join us today as we dig deeper into what is the state of waterfowl.
Welcome to another episode of Express Outdoors State of Waterfowl series. I'm your host, Doug Miller, down here at Gros Savon Lodge in Lake Charles, and we got the full crew back today. Kason, glad to have you back on board. We missed you last episode.
Yeah, good to be back. Thanks for having me.
Good deal. Jimbo, you pulling in the rear back there? You still with us in Stuttgart?
We're still with you. We're starting to feel like Lake Charles. It's wet, and I just heard a while ago, I think, Doug, did I hear right, Monticello's had like 12 inches of rain the past couple of days. Is that correct?
Yes, we have lakefront property here in a lot of places in southeast Arkansas that we're flooded.
And I know we're talking about ducks, but I can't imagine it being good for turkey broods right now.
Nope.
Man,
yeah, several reports of turkeys on nests just last week of folks that seen them up at Five Oaks, and you're right. I think they're probably taking a pounding this week.
Yeah. Oh well.
Crazy weather, crazy times, and that's kind of what we're here to talk about tonight. Is just the state of waterfowl, and we got a really cool guest tonight. If anything, he's got a great first name. We got Doug Osborne with us today, and he's a professor at the University of Arkansas at Monticello, doing some really cool research work there and putting out some great work. And we just wanted to sit down and visit with him and pick his brain on what's going on in his world with waterfowl. So, Doug, why don't you just start off and tell us a little bit about what you do at the University of Arkansas there?
Yeah, appreciate it, guys. Thanks for having me on. I look forward to our conversation here. I'm an associate professor here in wildlife management down in Arkansas. I got a research appointment with the Division of Ag and then a teaching appointment with the University of Arkansas at Monticello, and they got me stationed on campus here. I've been in the state for about 9 years here, and we've been studying turkeys and again, more recently and more intensely, waterfowl. Just really looking at patterns and distributions, patterns and migration. I got a pile of graduate students that are studying transmitter data from movements, looking at movement ecology, behavioral changes, those sorts of things. So we're in a business here of educating the next generation of biologists, next generation of scientists, policymakers. We hope they all come out of this program. So.
Doug, to your benefit, I was with at Department of Ag function yesterday afternoon here and down at Five Oaks, and was talking with Ed Penny, policy guy at DU, as you well know. And there's several people bragging on you and your program down there, and all the grad students coming out of UAM right now. And not only are they grad students interested in wildlife ecology and conservation, they're hunters also. They come from the same kind of cut we do. And I think there's a lot to be said for that. There's a lot of people interested in the outdoors who may not necessarily be consumptive users of the recreation that those outdoors provide. And I think that's even a better thing, that the kind of guys and girls that's coming through your program.
Yeah, yes, sir. Yeah, thanks, Jimbo. Ed called me yesterday on his way home from y'all's meeting, and we chatted about some of the things. But yeah, I'm proud of that, Jim. My students are, while I'm in education, when my students stop getting jobs, I'm leaving education. And so we're training these guys. We need somebody to fill my shoes when I leave. We need somebody to fill all y'all's shoes when you leave. We need land managers that understand, the changes that are happening. And so by I feel like our program's very hands-on. It's just a very practical, applied. We're doing applied science. It's stuff that we can take to the managers and better understand our resource. And so just the applied aspect of the science that we do, is making our students very attractive. It's historically a forestry program here, and we got a very strong forestry program still. A lot of foresters in the state come out of our program. So now, marrying the waterfowl ecology stuff that I do with the forest management stuff that we're doing in this division within our school here is we're really producing some good folks to work in the Southeast here in a forest-dominated landscape. So I'm proud to say, I got students defending this morning their PhD down at Texas Tech. My very first master's student, I got students going to work at refuges in Mississippi in August. I got students working in Ducks Unlimited as Arkansas biologists. We're proud of the students coming out of here. They come here, they work hard. We put them through the ringer, but I think it's going to be, we got to keep the momentum moving forward.
Yeah, you should be proud, Doug. I think there's probably a lot of people that don't understand or don't grasp kind of the issue we have. We don't have hunters that are going through these programs, and we're not churning out people that have a hunting background. You look at some of the bigger universities around, Doug, even there in your Miller, in your home state, LSU, a lot of the guys coming out of LSU are not hunters anymore. And it's something we as duck hunters, have to face and have to realize. But on the subject of some of your students there, I've had a chance to pull some birds with one of your students. She's helping with your GPS program. How's Starla working out down there?
Starla, yeah, she's doing good. She's working with the teal and the widgeon and the mallard data. It's a Delta Waterfowl funded project. Yeah. There's been so much emphasis put on the mallard duck, and a lot of our management really focuses around what we know about mallards. And so I think by gaining some additional information on habitat use, migration patterns, timing, influences from the stressors of the environment on how these birds respond behaviorally, those are the sorts of things that she's now looking at with teal and widgeon that we just don't know much about. And so it's exciting to have her on. I got Daniel Oden that's also working on that sort of same data set, the two of them there. He works on Lead Fork Farm out of Des Arc, y'all may be familiar with, but he's been working there for a while. But those two are sort of spearheading that project collectively, and they've divvied up some certain specific objectives between the two of them. But their field work, their passion in the field is intense. And that's, when students apply or how do I get into your lab? I say, you better show up with a fire in your gut, because if you don't have a fire in your gut, that's what I'm looking for. I'm not looking for the straight A student with the GRE ACT scores through the roof. I'm looking for somebody with a passion for waterfowl like I have. And so that's what drives me the most to hire these students. And Starla, that girl loves to be in the field, boy. She's tougher than nails. She's tough as any of the guys out there. So
that's exactly what I was going to say. I think she speaks volumes to your program there. Jimbo and I met her one cold February evening pulling birds up under a net, and you could tell. I mean, she's passionate. She's a good one. If she's any indicator of what you're doing there, you're doing a heck of a job. So
thank you so much, guys.
Speaking of great research projects, I know you've done quite a bit of stuff there, and I know you've done a lot of banding and some transmitter work and stuff. Why don't you just talk briefly, kind of maybe let's pick one of the research projects that you've been working on and some of the results that you're seeing from that.
Good deal. I appreciate it. The banding project started, 7 years ago or so, and I think it has sort of multiple purposes. One is, back in the 60s, the Fish and Wildlife Service was banding 6,000 to 8,000 mallards a year in Arkansas, in the core of the winter range along the White River Refuge. It was a big push to ban 8,000 mallards a year down here during the winter. So they did it 3 or 4 years, and then they backed off. And then in the 80s, again, they picked it up and banned it 3 or 4 years, 7,000 or 8,000 mallards. And so since the the 1980s till now, there's been a sort of a lull, and there was really no banding effort here. So my thought was, if we can pick it up again and get 6,000 or 8,000 mallards in Arkansas, or at least the core of the Mississippi Alluvial Valley, banded again in a particular year, we can look at changes, in distribution, changes in the timing of when the bands are showing up. These are, there's several biases with banding data. You get 2 points, right? You get a point of when the bird was deployed, and when you get one where it harvested, and you don't get any information in between. And there's lots of inferences that we sort of got to make about the data. But on a grander scale, we can compare where these things are showing up now compared to where they were historically. So we can start to look at, things like phyllopatric. What's the rate at which these birds really come back to the same place that they were at year after year, the first few years we started learning and seeing sort of some interesting patterns, right? Just little anecdotes coming up here and there. But now we got 7 years of data, and we got about 14,000 mallards or so, or 16,000 mallards banded over this time. And so now we're really starting to be able to get into the fact we can start to tease apart some of the information that we can learn from the banding. So the science behind the banding data was interesting. The second thing that the banding program really does for me is it gets these students that we just talked about in the field, tackling birds, working hard, putting up traps, beating down the weather, working at night, the hardest conditions possible. We're toughening up these students. And so I think one of the other big things is that we got the science that comes out of the banding. We have student training that comes out of the banding. I got 25 to 30 students a year that helps us on this banding. These are people that we're trying to build the fire in their gut for those kids that don't know what fuels their fire yet. You and I didn't know what we wanted to do until we experienced it. These kids come in unexperienced and they don't know, and you put them in a trap in the woods and leaky waders, in February in Arkansas, and all of a sudden they either love it or hate it. And the ones that they hate, they go on to find something that they love. The ones that they do love and they want to keep coming back, we just keep pushing them harder and harder for more, give them more experience. And so the banding program has given me an opportunity, a hands-on laboratory, a training experiment for these guys. Let's find the ones that are passionate about waterfowl. And the third thing that's come out of our banding program is involvement with the community, the hunting community, the local people, and just various other levels of folks. We've had Congressman Westerman out banding with us. He showed up and says, "What can I do?" I said, "What do you want to do?" He says, "I want to go in a trap." So Congressman Westerman's in that trap pulling ducks out. And so those sorts of things, just getting the people involved in this. You guys, we've been hunting ducks since we were growing up. And, and the first time you banded a duck, I can guarantee the smile on your face was bigger as it's been in a long time. You seen a grown man out there holding the duck in his hand, that's just gotten banded and about to let it go. He's like a kid again. For me, that fuels me. That's why I love doing what I do. That's in the education part. But to be able to involve the public in managing these resources and researching them and understanding them and banding them, we as the public pay for this resource. We're the ones that are buying our licenses, buying ammunition, it's fun. That's how this, North American model of wildlife conservation works. And so why not have y'all involved in this? And so for me to give the public an opportunity to come band with us once in a while, when we can, we try to be respectful of the landowners we band on, but that's also helping to sustain, I think, future hunters, right? And then when they bring their kids with them, a 6-year-old boy out there banding ducks with us, that makes me happy.
So did I understand you correct that you've done about 16,000 in the last 6 or 7 years?
I think we're about 16,000. This last winter, we did about 3,500 mallards, and we only had 12 days of trapping because of this ice. The ice helped us because we hammered them for a very short time before that ice. But after that ice, they cleared out relatively quickly, and we got shut down, of course, 10 days, because of that ice. So we had our second best individual year this past winter on mallards. We had 3,500 caught. Our best year has been 4,200. But we're over 16,000 mallards caught in the 6 or 7 or so years that we've been doing this. Yes, sir.
So go ahead, Jim.
One of the things, besides saying to your point there about banding ducks, when we did the banding show with you, that was a very cool experience to do just what you explained. But what I wanted to ask was, you talked about when White River Refuge folks were banding so many ducks back in the 80s and then back in the 70s. Have you done any correlation, cross-tracking, if you will, between those band reports and what y'all have done in the past couple of years to see if there's been a change in timing or site fidelity or any of that stuff?
Yeah. Good point. We have analyzed some of that data, and what we're seeing is we're seeing the band harvest location has shifted north just a couple of degrees compared to what it was. And so if you just take the latitude in which that band was harvested in the 60s, the mean latitude versus the 80s versus now, the trend is that it's shifted north just a couple of degrees is all in terms of treads. Now, but there's so much annual variation. 1 year it might be up here, the next year it's way down here again. So there's so much noise in the annual variation. But overall, the trend is what's important. And we think we are seeing a slope that's increasing. That means, little tiny bit, sort of a northerly shift. But we also got to think about maybe, there's so many other things than just the distribution of that bird being identified by that mean. And so I guess my disclaimer is I'm not saying that they're shifting north, but the trend in the data shows that there's maybe a couple of degrees higher latitude now than back in the 60s. And so there's lots of things, if all the hunters, if a lot more hunters move in up north and start hunting birds, and that's gonna pull the average up. And so there's lots of other factors that potentially influence that as well. But the trend is showing that the latitude from Canada, North Dakota, the mean latitude is sort of shifting down early in the year, and it's shifting up and later in the year. So it's basically what the data is showing us is that it's sort of compressing into the central state latitudinal states, and so it's shifting up a little and down a little in like September, and up a little, in December and January. So again, let me state that I'm not saying there's a northerly shift, but that's just what the trend now. But there's so much noise in that data to sort of tease that apart. Those are things we kind of want to get to, but the answer always is we need more data. So y'all need to start shooting more of these bands, right? We got to shoot these bands, and we got to report the bands. That's the thing. If you harvest them, report them, because that's the stuff we need to inform policy. That data helps us to inform policy if these changes really are occurring. So that's my plug for report your bands.
Of the 16,000, what's the percentage of returns?
It's about 7 to 8%. Yeah, we just did that. We got about a 7 or 8% harvest rate. So it's pretty much right on par with what we expect to see from the preseason banding, right? Because historically banding's done preseason, right before hunting season starts on the prairies. The birds can't hardly fly yet, and the adults are molting and they catch them then, and so we're doing this postseason banding. It's a little bit different. I'm expecting moving forward to find some neat patterns, because up north they're banding juveniles, they're banding females that may be more susceptible to harvest because they're young birds. And I'm catching birds that made it all the way through a full hunting season and they're alive still. and we're abandoning them. So maybe their survival rates are going to be better moving forward because they're smart. They got 1 year under their belt, So if harvest rate from birds in the prairies are from banded birds are different than harvest rates of what I catch down here of birds that made it through a full hunting season, if there's a big difference in those harvest rates, we need to sort of make sure that we account for that when we use, winter banded birds for making future policy decisions.
Case, and I interrupted you a while ago. Did you want to ask him something?
Yeah, while we were talking trends and sample size, you and I talked a couple of times about GPS marked birds and their movement over the winter. I talked to Paul recently, and it looked like most of our mallards, the few that we had that were still, reporting when we got that freeze in February, a lot of ours picked up and moved southward to Mississippi. They didn't make a big movement. They didn't really get out of ice, but they moved. And I think I recall you saying that most of yours hunkered down. Is that correct?
We did. We hunkered down, and a lot of our birds hunkered down for a good part of that ice. And it seemed like it got closer to the end of that ice, 6-8 days into it, then they moved. And it was interesting. Like they hunkered down, they tried to sit it out for so long, and maybe, this is where you get into the energetics. There's a payoff. Is it more energetically beneficial to hunker down and just sit it out and not eat, but don't spend any energy, and wait for the ice to go and then find food? Because you know where it's at, right? These birds are sampling experts. They know where the food's at, once that ice is gone. But how long can you last without eating? Is it more beneficial to up and move and go south and hope to find food when you get there? So there's that trade-off in terms of energetics, that decisions that these birds got to make. And so it's interesting that our birds seem to have hunkered down for a good bit of that ice, and at some point just kind of triggered them. And we had probably half of our birds, or maybe a quarter, maybe more like a quarter of our birds actually shifted south a bit into some parts of Mississippi.
How big a factor do you think photo period played on that? The fact that daylight's getting longer every day, and everything's in them saying, go north, go north, go north. Had that, your thoughts on if that same front would have hit, say, December 15th versus whenever it hit, in February when it hit, do you think there would have been a different movement with that?
Man, I would think. I would think so. But we're not in 8-inch ice country, and it was bad. There's reports of alligator kill-offs in this part of the world because the whole stinking pond froze up in some of these shallow waters. And so this was a brutal deal. I'm interested to see how this is going to impact populations overall, really, because we know we only harvest a small portion of the birds, and we got this sort of big surplus of the population. I'm kind of going off track of the question here a bit, but what I'm interested in is that I think we killed off. We killed some birds. This ice had a huge impact, and there's reports of dead birds everywhere. Mm-hmm. And so on the confounding, that kill off at the end of the year, the birds that are supposed to be available to breed next year, confounding that with the dry drought conditions on the prairies right now, and probably a low hatch, and already we're seeing low survival of our hens up there. They're getting clobbered on the nest. And so the ice confounding with poor breeding propensity this next year, I'm worried about fall flight. And so, I kind of got off on your question, off track there a bit, but, these birds, I grew up in Illinois, and I remember as a kid, ice fishing, and my dad made me use a hand auger. He wouldn't even buy electrical. So I'm out there as a kid, hand auger and these holes in the ice, and that ice was forever. I could never find the water. Now when you get ice up in that part of the country, it lasts 3 days and it's gone. We know the climate's changing. the ice doesn't stay as long up there, you know. So birds, I guess, now are just used to, okay, I'm going to hunker down in Missouri or Illinois for 3 days, and the ice is going to be gone, and then I'm good to live, you know. And so I'm sure that impacts migration, you know. And maybe that was their mentality when those birds were in Arkansas. Is that, well, I'll hunker down 3 days and we'll be back, and it just persisted, and you know, and so. I guess to directly answer your question would have been different. I don't know how to answer that. I don't know if it would have been. I would suspect that. Where else are they going to go? I mean, you can't go that much further south as a mallard duck. You know what I mean? Traditional. Right. This is the traditional winter area. And I mean, they go down south, but.
Let me explain my question a little differently. Maybe it's always been my thought, and Case and I talk about this a lot, but it's always been my thought, generally speaking, the old timers always said, if you ain't got them by Christmas, you ain't going to get them. So my thinking there, if that big, huge cold front would have hit mid-December, right before the solstice, because the days are getting shorter, they're thinking more, we're moving south, versus February, daylight's getting longer by a pretty big chunk. Mm-hmm. They're thinking it's time to go north. I wonder if that would affect how long that they set tight either direction.
Yeah.
Or can you see by any of your bands or transmitters, can you see migration propensity based on daylight hours or timing, calendar time of year?
I think that's something that the kids, you know, our students can probably dig into, and you know, as well as I do, that daylight is one of the drivers of migration. And so I'd hate to say that we need another event to happen at a different time of year to actually experimentally test it. I don't want to see it happen, but you know, but maybe someday we'll see that event happen in December instead, and we'll see different patterns. But I tell you, one of the reasons we had such a successful year, you know, a lot of the hunters were talking about, you know, late January, the birds just never really showed up. And I'm going to tell you what, they showed up in February. That ice storm, right before that storm, boy, we hammered them in the duck trap. And we caught a bunch of birds, and they were here thick, you know, right then and there. So that big ice storm pushed them out of the Midwest here late in the year, you know, in February. So,
Do you think that lack of disturbance, and we talk a lot about pressure and hunting pressure on birds, and Jimbo and I, one of our favorite things is, you know, 2 days after season goes out, everyone's like, oh man, there's so many ducks, they're in the road ditch, you know. Do you think the lack of disturbance in February during banding season has some correlation to how we see them in traps?
Yes. Yeah, definitely. Because I like to start our banding program the day after hunting's done, but we're banding in the same woods guys are hunting in, and the reality is you got to give them 5 days to get in there after hunting's done, you know. Yeah. Once they realize it, then after that we can get them baited and get them caught, you know. So the first week after hunting season, we got to let these birds settle down, and they do, and they quickly realize it's over with, you know. And we see it with our transmitters. Our transmitters are using the same 4 fields all hunting season, and then the hunting season ends 4 or 5 a week later. All of a sudden, now they're moving all over the state.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. I mean, it's just it's clear as day that you know, that these behavioral adaptations. I mean, they're responding to hunting. We know that, and so, but yeah, I mean, you know, give a week or so, or even 4 or 5 days after the hunting season, we start getting birds on bait pretty quickly after that. And then after that, you know, they want to be in the woods. You know, they need the woods. They've been needing to be in there all year, and we're shooting them out. You know, so I think some of our research now with transmitters, we're looking at this sort of sanctuary stuff and use of timber. You know, part of my concern with sort of building wetland complexes is that we always hunt all the woods, and we leave the moist soil fields and the ag fields on the edge for rest area. These birds need some rest area in the woods too. And so as we think about building wetland complexes, and carving out areas you can and can't hunt, as some of these, bigger owners or property owners, they may think about trying to carve out some timber, because the importance of the habitat, right, for, the essential, the micronutrients and the amino acids and those sorts of things that they get out of acorns that they don't get out of other food sources is important. The structure of the habitat and the timber that they use, is important. And so I think in terms of the health of the population and keeping birds in your area and making sure that they come back to the same spot every year, if we can provide them a little bit of all the habitat that they need, in certain areas on the landscape, we got to carve out some sanctuary in the woods that they can live in a bit too. Guys, we only need 4 mallards a day per guy.
Right. Talking about that, and I agree with that completely. And with your transmitters or your band returns, can you see different areas like from the mid-latitude states, what they're using? Are they making big pushes straight back to you? Is the site fidelity that strong, or are they just leapfrogging down the flyway, sampling their way down? Or do you see a trend either way with that?
And it may be the kind of cohort or group of birds that we're catching, but we see big migrations, like big jumps south, of some of our transmitter birds, not really hanging around all that long up there. And our goal, in the past couple of years is to try to catch these birds before hunting season starts, So we don't get mallards till, Halloween. And then, 20 days later, 25 days later, our season comes in. So we got 25 days to catch mallards on a wintering ground when there's not a lot of water, but there's food everywhere, right? So it's hard. It's not easy to catch them. So the minute mallards are getting here is when we're trying to catch them and put transmitters on. So we may be biased in our sample, right, by catching these early migrant birds that are coming to Stuttgart, Arkansas, because they've been coming here for 10 years anyway. That's probably the group of birds we're catching is these, these obligate migrants that are coming anyway.
They're coming on the cattle.
And now what we're seeing is they're making these big migrations. Some of them don't even step foot on the earth anywhere until, once they leave out of the prairies until they come here. And so some of them are making those big jumps.
Yeah, an example of that goes along with it, and I've said this before, so good friends with the folks at Greenbrier, and through time, every manager that's been there will tell you that somewhere around November 7th to 10th, every year they'll go from having 300-400 mallards on the rest area to 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10,000 just that quick. And I've always kind of considered those a different tribe of ducks versus the ones that kind of ease their way down the flyway based on weather fronts or food. And that kind of falls into what you're saying there. It's like different, you call them cohorts, I've called them a tribe that hit different places, and they're probably, that's very site fidelity heavy, I would think.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. I think everybody that pays attention to the resource, recognizing their birds. When your birds are there, they circle the woods the same. They come from the same area. They come into the hole the same. This is the birds that live here. But when you get new birds, that because they act different, right? You know when you got a new tribe. And so I think our banding data, Jim, is starting to tell us a lot about that too, is that we're, some of these birds that we're catching on the site in February are harvested back in the same stinking hole the next year. And so, in fact, we had a widgeon 2 years later shot about 7 feet away from where the trap was 2 years before, a widgeon. I mean, we know this happens with mallards, but that was kind of an interesting deal. The idea on the site fidelity is that, but I think we got all these tribes of birds everywhere that are locals to that spot. They're going to go there anyway. You're going to harvest a few, and we're catching those, and the guys are harvesting a few. But I think what we see is the big masses, the new hatch tribe, and the adult females, and that group is probably pushes on, it probably moves around the landscape more by weather and more by, daylight and all those sorts of things that we think traditionally should impact migration. We got these birds that are migrating, they don't care what the weather is, like a white-fronted goose. And then we got this other sort of tribe that's migrating according to the things they're supposed to be migrating by, what we know. And so we're always going to have that little cohort of birds there if we take care of our habitat. And we got to have it good. We got to have those birds there. We got to have the habitat healthy. So when the weather gets right and the migration conditions gets right, and that big tribe of new ducks comes, they see us, and we can attract them into our holes. And so, I agree with you 100%. Is I think we got all these little cohorts, little tribes everywhere, and we got this sort of massive group that when that migration doesn't get here, everybody in the South complains, and they know that the ducks aren't here. We need that cohort of birds. So, yeah.
Anybody else has a question, jump out there, but it leads me to one I got last night doing our live deal. I was asking about show ideas, and this is a good one I think you'd be a part of, and I think I want to start doing something. Flyway evolution over like the past 30 years. You notice a little trend northward in harvest rate slightly. Do you see, and again, I know there's annual variations year to year, but a lot of people talking about the eastern central flyway becoming a hotspot. I think it's always been there, just more people know about it. But however, that being said, could you go back to those White River banding programs from the 70s and 80s and then see if the flyway has shifted westward at all?
Yeah, I looked at that, and that's actually less clear than the north shift in terms of the band data. And so, just the last 5 years or so of data, we've been plotting the birds that were banded that previous February, where they show up the next year. In some years, the distribution of the bands is really tight, and there's all these little spots of where they show up. And then if you look back at, water layer maps for that year, it's like, oh, well, it was dry everywhere else, and here's water, and they're harvesting them. 2 years ago, the first year that the eruption sort of happened, what was it, the 2019 season, we didn't have many birds down here at all. And we plotted that map, and it was a big, huge blob over the Midwest, over to the west, to the south. Like, instead of all these little hot spots of where our bands were being harvested through the flyway, it was a big, huge blob, and they were just scattered everywhere. That was the year the world was flooded up there, right? And so there was habitat everywhere. There was water everywhere, at least, and the birds were, avoiding hunters. They had more places to go, and it was just scattered. The distribution was about the same, but it was just blowed up. And so, from the 60s to the 80s to now, there's really zero evidence from the data that I have. And I'm not saying it's the best data in the band recovery, but what it is, it's a long-term data set. We as biologists don't have all that many long-term data sets to look at how changes have happened from the 60s to now. What do we got? We got banding data that's gone on for a long time, right? We know it's got its challenges. We know that band data has its limitations, okay? And understanding distribution of bird populations from band data, we know is a limitation. But I try to do it anyway, because it's in my opinion, one of our best data sets. We have aerial surveys that have come on and gone off, and then the routes change, the experimental design changes, and then you got to understand the impacts it has on the inferences you can make from that data. So we got the wing bee survey, right? And the harvest survey from the feds. So, those that are watching, when you get randomly drawn and asked from the feds to fill out the survey, they're not against you. They're not trying to shut your hunting down. They're trying to get a random sample of data that's going to be statistically sound to make inferences on populations. And so those surveys are important. So really those sort of three pieces of information is all we have in terms of long-term data sets. And there's holes in some of those, and there's definitely limitations to all of it in the inferences we can make. But the data, the banding data is just what I've been looking at, and I think it's starting to show some neat trends. And we as scientists just got to be careful to make sure that, you know, the data are telling us what we would truly think we are. So the biases with the data sets always have to sort of come to the front of, to the front of the table. And we got to make sure that the biases that we know about are on the table, and we're trying to address those the best we can. So, information's not perfect, right? I mean, but we just got to do the best we can with the information we have.
Let me ask you this, Doug. We had an interesting observation this year, and this may be opening Pandora's box a little bit. We had one of our GPS marked mallard hens go down the Central Flyway and spend its winter just south of College Station this year. Jimbo, your comment about the shift to the Central and East made me think about that. And when that happened, we laughed. I looked at the map and I was like, oh man, the internet's going to melt down when they see that one, and just, it's just one bird. So nobody jumped to any conclusions. But have you seen with your birds, have you seen any, just wild out there movements that you totally wouldn't expect?
Yeah. We have a sample size of 2 on that deal, because we had one do that as well. We had one skip country, and that thing out of Des Arc, Arkansas, went straight west, and the path went right down the interstate. And then it went south and it disappeared. I thought some stinker. It was like the weekend of youth season. I'm like, some old boy shot the transmitter, driving down the interstate with it, and stuck in his freezer. Now I'm not getting any data. So it went offline for 2 or 3 days, and I'm like, oh man, that thing's gone. Somebody rifled that thing down. I'm trying to figure out what field it was shot out of and everything else. And the next thing you know, about a week later, this thing popped back online, and it's down on the coast it's on the border of Texas and Oklahoma border on the river down there. Sitting in some cattle pasture. That thing's live as can be. And so we had the same thing. We just had one bird that skipped town, and he went right over top the Mount Ouachitas and went south down to Texas. And so we just had one bird do that out of all of ours. And we got over 200 transmitters on birds, and so we had the one do that. So that was it was an interesting little deal. I was blaming somebody for shooting it during the youth season, and it was a live bird. So there he went.
We've had at least one that we were convinced was in a freezer somewhere, but then just a couple of days later popped up somewhere else and was still kicking. So,
but yeah, I don't know, guys, the whole shift west thing, and like you said earlier, it maybe just everybody over here just is hearing about people having better hunts. And, hunters nowadays, we're going to where the birds are. That's another thing about the band data. It's like, well, the band data could be skewed towards, hunters. There's a lot more hunters in Arkansas than there is somewhere else. So, of course, you're going to get a lot more bands here. But nowadays, hunters are going to the birds. If there's a pile of birds somewhere, there's hunters going there. So the chances of harvesting a band there, if the bands are truly there, should be just as good as it is somewhere else. And so, not sure my point on that whole deal.
That makes really good sense based on the idea you look at federal duck stamp sales kind of being flat or trending downward, but yet our harvest numbers stay up. In states like Arkansas, our state stamp sales are way high. So where are them hunters coming from? Well, it's that 1.2 million duck hunters that's going to them.
Yeah,
I'm one of those guys.
Yeah,
that's how we make our living.
Yes, sir.
Well, guys, I've been sitting here writing a ton of questions down. I can see that we're going to have to get Doug back on another episode because we're already approaching our time limit. It's hard to believe we've been talking this long, and we hadn't even got off of the banding yet. I guess before we wrap this thing up, is Kaysen or Jim, any of you guys have any other last-minute thoughts for Doug? I know he's got some really cool stuff going on, and I'm hoping we can get him back and get further into it.
Well, I want to make note of this. Yeah, go ahead, Jim.
No, that's all. I want to come back to Duck Energy Days and how that affects our recruitment, along with harvest, and hen harvest, and how those two factors may correlate to reducing recruitment to ducks overwintering in Arkansas. I think there's a correlation there, but I can't prove it. But I'm curious of thoughts on that. And I know that's a big one to jump into. What's yours, Casey?
I want to make note of hen mortality rate on the nesting ground. Doug's got a lot of observations there with transmitters, and I've seen a bunch of it myself. I think that's a whole episode right there, though. So I just want to, Doug Miller, add that to your notes of things to talk about, because that's a big one.
We can do that, but we definitely got to get Doug back. So, man, in closing, Doug, did you want to conclude anything on your end?
We're dealing with just dealing with a lot of change, huh? I mean, there's a lot of things going on with the waterfowl out there and people are, I guess what I'm excited about is people care. They just redid the band reporting rate. So that's the rate. If the bird was harvested with a band, what's the probability it's going to be the guy's going to call it in? The reporting rate's like well over 90% now. 10 years ago, it was down in the low 80s. So that just the times that we're in now with media, people are interested in this stuff. Like they're interested in learning about the what the band is going to tell us. Where did it come from? It just fires me up that people care about the information. And so podcasts and things like this has been fun to do. It's been fun to be able to sort of translate some of our information that we're learning to the public instead of, some historically scientists are, you collect this information, you publish it, you stick it in some scientific journal somewhere and you the bean counters count how many publications you got and you move on to the next. That's not how we're running. That's not how I run my operation. If the data that we're collecting as scientists isn't translated to the manager and isn't translated to the hunter, in my opinion, we're missing the boat. And historically, we've had that disconnect between science and management. And I think by you guys allowing me to come on and talking about the things that we're doing here, this is just another avenue for me to translate science to the public and to the people that care. And so, we just gotta stand strong in our resource and keep pushing on and do what we can do to make the hunting and the resource better, so our kids can, have some strong hunting opportunities. So.
Well, again, we appreciate all your hard work and all the work you push to push students. We know working with the new generation nowadays can sometimes be challenging, and so for you to crank out such good students and future workers in our line of work is really a cool thing. And we just thank you for the passion you have for waterfowl. And as you said, and if you guys, listening to our podcast now, have noticed we've got a new introduction. And if you listen to that, it's all about the resource. If we don't have the ducks, we don't have anything. So that's why the State of Waterfowl series to us is so important, to just talk about what's going on and not, instead of formulating these opinions and what I think is, let's let the science do the work and bring the guys in or the doing the research and see what we can do to make better habitat and just make it better for future generations to come. So again, Doug, thank you. And for the guys that are interested in following Doug Osborne, he's got some really cool stuff on Instagram. You can follow him at Osborne_lab and see a lot of the pictures of them trapping and the banding stuff that they do. So just want to thank everybody out there for listening. Got to thank Express Boats again for giving us the platform to do this. And hopefully we can continue to bring this series to you. Jimbo, thank you for joining us. Kaysen, glad you was able to get back with us. And hopefully everybody will stay tuned to our next episode. We'll see you guys later.
Thanks so much for joining us today. Be sure to invite your friends to listen, share, and subscribe to this podcast. We all want to know, what is the state of waterfowl?